Up first, in breaking news tonight, The Sun reports the suspended BBC star broke COVID lockdown laws to meet a young stranger from a dating site. The newspaper says the presenter allegedly ignored strict COVID rules, even though his own network was broadcasting round-the-clock coverage of the pandemic. It's reported the star visited the 23-year-old's home and asked for a picture, which he was sent. They communicated in November 2020, leading to the star travelling across London to another county to meet them at their flat in February 2021. This appears to be the third person involved with the presenter. Earlier today, a second young person in their 20s claimed they were first contacted anonymously on a dating app before being put under pressure to meet up. When they hinted online that they might name the presenter, they alleged they were sent abusive and menacing messages filled with expletives, and they said it frightened them and they remain scared. This comes days after The Sun revealed the first claims the household name paid tens of thousands of pounds to a youngster for sexually explicit images. Well, the BBC boss, Tim Davie, today announced the corporation has paused its own investigation at the request of the police, who are deciding whether to launch their own inquiry. Meanwhile, the broadcaster is reviewing its complaints procedure after admitting the top presenter was not confronted about the allegations for 7 weeks. In a radio grilling this afternoon, Tim Davie denied that it was odd that he's yet to speak to the star personally.
I'm not going to get into the specific conversations with the presenter.
Have you spoken to him?
Personally, no. He's been spoken to by a senior manager.
Has he offered to resign?
Again, that is a matter that I think we have to respect the privacy of an employee.
Yes, I think this is the privacy law is the thing which is stopping this moving forward. We had this discussion yesterday about whether or not the star should be named. I'm very much not for him to be named until, particularly because there were claims that what had happened was not unlawful, was not illegal, that the person, the young person in the very first case that we heard about, had said that there was nothing unlawful that went on. And then you think about sort of expanding this out. When somebody is named in a situation like this, it is not just them who is out, the whole there are families, friends, other people who get involved and who are hurt when something happens like this. I mean, the thing about this is, every sort of moment that we're waiting for something else to happen
you can tell
now.
That this is now the story, isn't it?
This is now
We've got this incredible development tonight. It's going to be on the front page of the Sun tomorrow morning. There's the third person now, it would seem, to be involved, who's saying that they met on a dating site, that he went to his house several times, that despite the fact that there were lockdowns going on, and despite the fact at one point that the person in question had COVID, this is an incredible sort of revelation. And I think the problem with not identifying whoever it is, or the person not identifying themselves, is that you'll just get more and more pressure building. And inevitably, when you get to a point where you think, well, the name's going to come out, you might as well be the person that gets the name out if you're that person, it seems to me.
But that's
the
now,
BBC have now found themselves in a terrible quandary, because they originally, I think, sort of before last night's second revelation, once they got the first letter from the lawyers to say it was all rubbish, lots of people were kind of going, oh, well, that's it then. Sun must have screwed that up.
I think that's
but, of course,
the
Sun haven't, because the Sun are now going to take us to other places. They've obviously got people who have been in touch with them, like all these sort of cases of Me Too and whatever. There's a lot of people out there who have had encounters with this person. So the story is just going to get more and more complicated, I think, for the BBC.
And that's the thing, is that I feel like with every day that goes on, without the person in question identifying themselves, it's going to get worse and worse and worse. Are we now going to have a situation where, well, the weekend we had the Sun telling us about the first young person. Yesterday we had the BBC telling us about the second. Now we've got the Sun telling us about the third. Is it back to the BBC to tell us about the fourth, and the Sun will give us the fifth? How long does this go on for before the person in question stands up and says,
"It's me.
It was me,"
and actually puts their point of view? I suppose, maybe
and I think
rebut some of the allegations. Perhaps
whether we like it or not, that person does have a right to reply. I think it's up to them to say, this is who I am. There's definitely consequences of doing that. Families involved, like you so rightly said, the families of the young people. But if even just to take the heat off other BBC presenters who are having to spend their days saying, it is not me. if you care about your colleagues, do that.
No,
but I also
I think
think,
there
you
are
know,
other things in there.
whether or not something criminal happened,
Yeah, but that's the point.
and that's
That's
what
exactly
that's
that.
what we don't know, because we don't know the ages of all of the people involved. We don't know when it started.
But
we don't know how
that's
they are
the crux
when they
of the
started.
issue.
Yeah,
Because
exactly.
a crime, up as we're speaking now, has not been committed. Right, so we don't know.
Well, although
so
there may now have been one committed during lockdown.
Yeah,
because
if
you're
you're
going to
breaching
have police
lockdown,
going around
I'm
handing out
sorry,
fines.
that's a bit of a nothing case. How many people
But
met
it's still
up with
technically,
people?
technically, it's a breach
Exactly.
at that
And
time.
People did that.
No, so many people did that. Yes, they did. But if we're going to have inquiries over Boris Johnson and all the rest, should this unnamed BBC presenter not also be subject to that? Are we not all subject to the same rules?
What I'm
no,
saying
because,
is-
Some rules
no,
for
because,
some-
no,
for
because
some
I think that's a
others and
different
some rules-
standard. Because this BBC presenter wasn't the person that actually legislated.
No, but
for
the
us
point
to
is
be
it could
locked down.
alter the police's interest in the case, is what I'm saying. Because
I
there's another
think the
aspect
thing is,
to it.
I'm this may sound unpopular. I'm not interested in the individual or the actions in question because, so far as I'm concerned, a crime has not been committed. If a crime has been committed, then that's different. I think the only real story here is what the BBC knew, when they knew it, and what they did when they knew it. Because if their actions were insufficient, it would really make us question whether they've learned anything from the scandals of the past. That's
Which
the real
they
issue.
haven't.
I
They
think- I
haven't,
think that
clearly.
is-
We don't know that yet, but that's
No,
the
we don't.
real story here,
Well,
not this person in question.
Agreed. And I mean, the business of naming the person is now a bit tricky because apparently 10 million people in the country know the name of the person. So I know that's not necessarily the reason to release the name of the person, but it does kind of give a different flavour to sort of where we're at. I thought the Tim Davie interview, I mean, this is a corporate man who shinned his way up the corporate ladder from Procter & Gamble through Pepsi, found himself as the head honcho of the BBC. Don't be deceived by the kind of, you know, all right, mate, working class accent. This is an Oxbridge establishment character that knew exactly what he was doing. He ended up posing more questions than he did answers in that interview. We took the interview live this afternoon. I'm not expecting him specifically to have spoken to the person concerned. I know some people say he should have done. There are more senior managers at the BBC than there are in most workplaces.
Yeah.
So there's enough people to speak to the guy. What is interesting is the 7-week gap. I'm sorry, I think that's unforgivable. I think when you've got allegations of this, which could be potentially
But we don't know
criminal.
what they
Except
knew.
the-
No, but we do know what they knew because
7
they've given
weeks.
us a timeline. They have given us a timeline which says
their own words.
that they received this information from the family who made the first complaint on May the 19th. They have then admitted that nobody then told
They
anybody else.
passed it up the check.
No.
as I
But
understood
apparently
it,
they
passed
found it difficult to
No, they
contact
didn't.
the
They found it
mother
difficult to
who
contact
No,
the
they
made
didn't pass it up
the
the chain because
allegation.
I asked that question specifically today by a reporter who was there who watched every single question, every single answer, and they did not pass it to anybody. And so it went nowhere. So it was only last Thursday that Tim Davie found out about it because it was a call from the Sun.
Because they tried to, they made one phone call and one email. And if anybody that works for me or with me, and I think I speak for Mike as well, and only made one phone call and one email to try and get in touch with somebody, you'd say, well, you're probably in the wrong job, mate.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. And then Tim Davie had the audacity to say at this kind of curious Radio 4 interview that actually got this great investigation. It's in his best Danny Dyer. We've got this great investigation. So, well, clearly you haven't got a great investigation team because they failed to find somebody that would have been very easy to locate and particularly with that amount of resources behind you. He then talked about the trust in the BBC. He then went on to say that even if the presenter concerned had ended up still speaking to the BBC or even financed the chief witness, as this young person would be, even if they'd financed it, that's nothing to do with the BBC.
I would be
he
very
said.
curious.
I mean, this was a classic.
The thing is, though,
of-
I'd be curious to know what procedures other companies have in place when they receive allegations like this, because we're
Well, you
talking about
hope
the
it's better
BBC
than that,
because
don't
it's
you?
funded by the license fee, and there's always this sort of this conversation about whether we should be funding the BBC. But imagine if it was just a corner shop or just your average
Or
company out there.
ITV. Let's not go
but
a
the thing
million
is,
miles
but
away.
it would
Let's
be-
just go to
if it-
ITV. What did they
Well,
do?
ITV, yes, but the thing is that's still media and still broadcasting. I'm just talking about these are still companies, and there are different types of companies. They're pharmaceutical companies. I would be interested to see how other companies, what the process looks like when they receive
I've got
allegations.
a feeling,
for
Esther, that
high-ranking
if you rang most companies and
employees.
somebody made an allegation that is potentially criminal to the point that somebody could go to jail for 10 years, then you'd like to think...
They'd probably
that the
say go to the police.
You'd like to think that the chief protagonist or the person accused will be spoken to within 7 weeks. I'm not saying they do it that night or that day. They
But
might
the
want to
thing is,
establish
why
7
is
weeks
that
to
at the,
talk to
the
someone.
why,
but you
why,
can't-
why is that the
but
responsibility of the
also
employer?
I
Because
think
the person in question
you're
Hold on a second,
sorry, the person in question wasn't an employee of the BBC. I think we should be very careful because I don't think businesses should be getting involved in the sex lives of their employees.
Well, actually, you're wrong there. You're absolutely wrong
No,
about
because
that.
if the
do you
person
mean
in
they're not an
question,
employee?
no, I'm sorry, the alleged victim in this case,
okay.
was not an employee of the BBC.
No, but it
so I
doesn't
don't
matter.
see why the BBC should be more proactive in getting involved in a case like this, where it's a high-ranking sort of executive, which I understand the sensitivity around, and someone who's outside of the organisation. Yes, the case is sensitive, but
Right.
at
So in
the
your
best,
view, then,
at the least, they
in
should have said
in
go to
your
the
view,
police
then,
if
the
it's
guy who was the
illegal.
chairman of Tesco's, who's just got fired
Yeah.
for inappropriate behaviour, should never have been fired. All the people that have been fired for
If it wasn't with
inappropriate,
an
Philip
employee,
Schofield
well,
should never have been
No,
fired.
but the thing is, Philip Schofield, no, he was directly involved. That person
that's
was
not- no,
employed
you-
at ITV,
no,
and he
you're
was
driving the
employed
car
because
off the
of Philip
cliff here.
Schofield.
Sorry, no, I don't
No, but
agree
he was
with you.
employed because of
No,
Philip
Esther,
Schofield.
the point
There's a
about
power
this, hang on,
dynamic
the
there.
point about this, there's no point in trying to derail the conversation into something completely different that makes no sense. The point about the BBC is that it's publicly funded. The person involved is said to be a high-ranking presenter on the channel. Now, any person who works in the media
But
has
no
a
crime has
duty,
been
has a
committed.
duty
Wait.
not to bring the company into disrepute.
Correct.
That's exactly
so
what I
anything
was
that
But
he
the
does.
company hasn't been brought into
Well, you
dispute
don't
because
know
no
that.
crime has been
Esther,
committed.
Esther,
No,
That is
crime has been
either-
it doesn't
Esther.
have to be a crime. There
To
was no
bring
crime
it
on
Exactly.
ITV
Whe-
when
whe-
Philip Schofield went.
Whether
right?
or not a crime has been committed, you cannot disagree that the reputation of the BBC has been brought into disrepute.
Well, then-
And when you sign a contract with a company, when you agree to work with them, part of your contract will say that you agree not to bring
Correct,
the
that you
company
literally sign
into
that in your
disrepute.
contract.
And so
What are the
whether,
specifics around that, though?
but whether or not a crime has been committed, this high-ranking presenter is responsible for damaging headlines about the BBC. Now, the BBC have been here before with Jimmy Savile, and it's clear that they have not learned lessons about whether to speak to someone about their inappropriate behaviour, when to shut it down. They clearly have not learned these lessons because it should never have taken 7 weeks from them finding out about this to where we are now. And in fact, it should never be playing out
You do
like
wonder
this.
if they shouldn't have an exterior organisation that actually is.
I don't know. I think so.
looks at them.
I'm waiting for a crime to have been committed.
yeah.
But it's not
That
just
should
about
be a
crime, though.
step. I
That's
do
the
think
point.
it is.
It isn't.
Well,
It's really not.
I think we're going to have to agree to disagree on that particular point. I'm sure we'll come
I don't
back to
agree
that.
to disagree. She's wrong.
Thank you very much.
And I agree not to,
Yeah.
to disagree.
So no, just to remind ourselves of this these latest claims. Then this is about the BBC presenter who has been suspended and breaking COVID lockdown laws to meet this young stranger from the dating site. That's the latest.